This is a continuing lecture by Professor Rafael Chacón at the University of Montana on Egyptian art and architecture. Historians have divided Egyptian history into what are called intermediate periods and kingdoms. Kingdoms are generally periods of political stability in which you have long reigns of dynasties, and in general Egypt is united into one state. Both Upper and Lower Egypt are under a single crown. Whereas the periods known as intermediate periods are used to describe the breakdown of central authority, rival kingdoms, sometimes warfare, and the breakdown of political unity and strong central authority into local and regional authority and rivalry. So the first intermediate period, we have rule from the city of Memphis ending in the 8th dynasty. And then what happens is that power shifts south to the city of Herakleopolis Magna near the oasis of Fayum in what was then known as Middle Egypt. There is scant information about the dynasties, the 9th and the 10th dynasties, but we know that by the 11th dynasty, power will shift to a new capital located farther south in Upper Egypt, and that place is known as Thebes. And then what happens in this intermediate period is a long period of rivalry between the city of Herakleopolis in the north in Lower Egypt and Thebes in the south in Upper Egypt. This is a period of crisis with a great deal of social inequality, where provincial aristocrats take power, and sometimes we have kings who rule in small principalities known as nomarchs, or overseers of priesthood, which in fact rules in their stead. A great deal of war and competition is apparent during this period. There are also some shifts in the art of this period. So there are, as far as we can tell, no major building projects, although there are significant addition of rural tombs for wealthy elites, particularly those ruling in local circumstances. So a number of different objects, such as ceramics, wheel-made ceramics, coffin texts in burials, and the use of cartonnage masks as well. So again, no major building projects from a centralized state, but rather a series of smaller, wealthier rural tombs. These two maps both show us the competition between capitals in Egypt during this first intermediate period. So again, Memphis in the southern part of the Delta was the traditional capital until the 8th dynasty. Herakleopolis then becomes the first capital during the first intermediate period, and that's farther south, close to the Fayum oasis. And then the rival capital in the 11th dynasty is Thebes, considerably farther south along the Nile in Upper Egypt. So again, to reiterate, there are two capitals that are rivals during the first intermediate period: Herakleopolis in the north and Thebes in the south. Herakleopolis seems to have been ruled by the house of Keti, and then a later ruler by the name of Merikara. There's very little information about these kings, although Merikara seems to have been important enough to earn the sobriquet of a great philosopher. Thebes in the south was the traditional capital of the fourth nome in Upper Egypt, and then Intef I establishes it as his capital, and he continues to in fact build on the west bank across from Karnak, the city of Karnak, and the necropolis at El Tarif. There we'll see a number of rock-cut tombs known as soft tombs that are built by aristocrats and the local rulers. And this is typical of a stela, a carved stela honoring a dead aristocrat. We see the individual seated on the left in a rather pharaonic pose, although remember, this is not a pharaoh, but rather a nobleman or aristocrat, a local ruler, with some offerings in the realm of the dead now. There are a number of objects that emerged during this period that are quite interesting. These elites and aristocrats who build rural tombs will often fill them with objects like these. These are models of the kinds of daily activities that took place in their estates, in their villages, in the towns that they governed. And these are activities that were expected to continue in the afterlife through the use of these models. Most of these are carved out of wood and then painted, although some of them are actually rendered in ceramic as well. And these were burial objects, funereal objects for these rural tombs used by elites in the Intermediate period. So these are two models, one on the left of a bakery, on the right of a bakery, and on the left of a butcher shop. And these come from tombs in Beni Hassan and Deir el-Bahri, and both date from the 11th dynasty. Here's another detail of two individuals, one grinding grain to form bread, and the other one baking it in an oven on the right. Two other ones showing a granary on the left and a brewery on the right. These are quite charming as they reveal not only the expectations of these wealthy individuals in the afterlife and the continuation of their lives in the afterlife, but also very much the conditions, the working conditions of average Egyptians in the Middle Kingdom or the First Intermediate period. Here's another one from the tomb of Meketre of a granary. Notice the number of servants and scribes that it takes to run an elite or wealthy household during this period. Two images of scribes, both at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Again, these are sometimes rendered in carved wood and painted, and sometimes in ceramic. On the left, we see a farmer plowing a field with two oxen, and on the right, servants working, although it's not quite clear exactly what they're doing. Now, the Middle Kingdom, as the title implies, is a period of political reunification, in this case under pharaohs that ruled at Thebes, and this happens during the 11th dynasty. Although the capital will eventually, in the 12th dynasty, be moved farther north to a town known as Lisht, near the Fayum oasis. And rule then from Lisht stretches into the first half of the 13th dynasty. So this is a map showing us again these the Nile and the cities along the Nile. And notice that Lisht is at the southern end of the delta, near the ancient necropolis of Saqqara and the oasis at Fayum to the west. So there are a number of significant pharaohs who will rule from either Thebes or the later Lisht. The most important one would be the dynasty, the Mentuhotep dynasty. And that is, and the most significant pharaohs are Nebuchadnezzar Mentuhotep II, Sankara Mentuhotep III, and Nebtawira Mentuhotep IV. So Nebuchadnezzar Mentuhotep is the most significant one of these pharaohs. His title, Pleased is the Lord Ra, was the title that he ruled with, although he had changed his Horus name from Nyet, divine one of the white crown, to Sematawi, one who united the two lands, after he assumed control of all of Egypt. He conquered the old capital of Herakleopolis upon the death of Merikara, and then begins to control all of Egypt from the city of Thebes in the south. This is a period recorded to have had a lot of prosperity, and also a number of records from recording that prosperity. Nebuchadnezzar Mentuhotep is significant because he built a significant mortuary complex at a site known as Deir el-Bahri across from Karnak on the Nile, which we shall see shortly. And it's in this period when the myth of Osiris and the cult of Osiris seems to have been emphasized in Egypt. These are two sculptures of Mentuhotep II, Nebuchadnezzar Mentuhotep II. The one on the left is at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And it shows us, in fact, now the traditional convention of the pharaoh returning to Egypt. Both of these reliefs show us a triumphant king in profile, in low relief, in a very archaic style now. The reliefs were carved in, very shallowly and then painted naturalistically. In this case, it shows us Mentuhotep wearing the two separate crowns of Egypt. So the relief on the left comes from Deir el-Bahri, his mortuary complex, and the one above from the city of Thebes. And the slide shows us, in fact, the great funerary complex at Deir el-Bahri. The temple in the foreground is actually a later temple complex built by the pharaoh Hatshepsut. Mentuhotep II is towards the south, so it's actually in the background. It's the smaller of the two. And here you see a large view from the air showing us that mortuary complex carved into the cliffside on the west bank of the Nile. And here's a view of the temple of Mentuhotep in the foreground. This is now viewed from the south, with the temple of Hatshepsut farther north. And another view of the ruins of Mentuhotep's mortuary complex viewed from the air. As you can see, it was a large platform with a ramp and a structure surrounded by a hypostyle courtyard, or an arcade, excuse me. And again, here's that relief again that shows us Mentuhotep wearing one of the two crowns of Egypt, and this is again from his funerary complex. Among a number of the fragments recovered from that mortuary complex are images of defeated enemies. In this case, we see them their bodies broken, covered, shot through with arrows in a very undecorous fashion. So the following 12th dynasty is also characterized by strong rulers. Sehetepibra Amenemhat the first is most likely the vizier to Mentuhotep IV, and he begins this new dynasty, this 12th dynasty. There's some evidence that he was indeed a commoner rather than a royal. But the dynasty did have, in fact, significant pharaohs, and a lineage known as the Senusret lineage, the first one being Keperkara Senusret I, who ruled for a very long time, apparently about 45 years. And the emphasis here seems to shift south to the province of the newly created province of Nubia. So there was a great deal of trade with Central Africa by way of Nubia in the land of Kush. There were materials such as gold, amethyst, turquoise, copper, and nice precious materials traded through Nubia during this period. We see in the 12th dynasty the widening of the cult of Osiris, and then the construction of monuments which tend to eclipse the use of local cults and local deities, the veneration of local deities. The capital in the 12th dynasty is at Tawy, and there we see, in fact, the expansion of a bureaucracy and more writing. And it's in this period that we have a significant text, and this is known as the Tales of Senui, which in fact tells us about court life in the 12th dynasty. So the significant kings of the 12th dynasty are Nubkarura Amenemhat II, Kahepera Senusret II, Kakauda Senusret III, Nematra Amenemhat III, and Makarura Amenemhat IV. Here are two portraits of Senusret I on the left and Senusret II on the right. Now falling into the traditional conventions of pharaonic portraiture with fairly abstract likenesses, conventionalized depictions of an idealized face. It's hard to tell these two pharaohs apart. These are not likely to have been portraits, but rather conventional images of pharaohs wearing their pharaonic headdresses and skirts, and sometimes seated quite rigidly on thrones. There are some inklings of naturalism and portraiture in some of the likenesses of Senusret. This is Senusret III in a small fragment of a sculpture at the Met in New York City. And this one is in the Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, and it bears a striking resemblance to the former Egyptian president Anwar Sadat. So there are in fact evidence of portraiture among some of the fragments from this 12th dynasty. And Senusret III's major accomplishment was the building of a fortress in the town of Buhen on the Nile in Nubia. The fortress served a strategic purpose, and that is to control trade to Central Africa. So it was controlling Nile trade, and it became a major port for the 12th dynasty. And here's a map that shows us indeed where Buhen is located. So in fact, south of Aswan along the River Nile. So the 13th dynasty is characterized by a continuation of that great Nubian trade and the policies of the 12th dynasty. The capital was at Tawy, and there are lots and lots of records from this period, particularly of flooding and the damages caused by the great floods along the Nile, as well as some revolts in the province of Nubia. And it's in this period when, in fact, there's apparently a series of revolving rulership, of revolving crowns, or circulating succession, as historians call it. And some of these kings may have even been of non-royal stock. We enter a second intermediate period here, where Egypt is divided into the kingdoms of Kush and Avaris, and then we have an invasion. We have a Semitic people known as the Hyksos, who in fact conquer the Delta, and in the 17th and 16th and 17th dynasties, we have actually actual war between the Hyksos and Egyptian rulership from Thebes. The period closes with the victory of Ahmose I of Thebes, who conquers the city of Avaris, expels the Hyksos, and restores unity to the state. Ahmose was known as the son of the moon god Yah, the great unifier of Egypt, the conqueror of Avaris and Kush, and in fact restores unification and order to the land. During his rule, there's some evidence of contacts across the Aegean, possibly with the Minoan civilization in the islands of the Aegean Sea, and then the continuation of the Osiris myth, but also the veneration of the Middle Kingdom gods Ta, Amun, and Montu. His tomb has been excavated, and we do have a mummy of Ahmose I, and that's the image you see there on the right, and also a little shabti, so a small figurative sculpture showing us the effigy of the pharaoh in the afterlife. And the shabtis, of course, were servants to the pharaoh on the other side. And to end this lecture, I'll also show you some of the luxury goods identified with the tomb of Ahmose. The objects that you see there on the left are predominantly luxury goods belonging to Queen Ahhotep, but also objects belonging to Ahmose I, including a battle axe that you see at the top of that black and white photo on the left, and also the battle axe again on the right in the colored photograph. And so this brings our discussion of the first intermediate period and the restoration of unity under Ahmose to an end.